BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello everybody, today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? I hope everyone had a good weekend. In this episode, I will be responding to the videos from Jay Foy about his Zodiac Killer suspect Richard Hoffman, looking at a new proposed solution to the Z32 Cipher, and I will be joined later on in the program by Scott Bobbitt to talk about a new Zodiac Killer suspect. The Zodiac Killer was a serial killer who operated in California in 1968 and 69. Whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. And I think at this point, there's someone who needs no introduction. His name is Jay Foy. He is the grandson of Richard Hoffman, and he has taken the internet by storm. Firstly, he made a series of TikTok videos that went viral, and I expect that their views are now in the tens of millions. And then he has been interviewed on other channels, but he has stated that he is not going to be making a lot of his own original content, and I heard this on the YouTube channel Loey Lane, who stated that he is in talks with some type of media deal, but he is doing interviews discussing his Zodiac Killer suspect, Richard Hoffman. I particularly like the one he did on the Groovy Gavin channel, and that one has more than 1 million views as we speak, and it's probably just going up. And I have to give full credit to Groovy Gavin for that. That's a YouTuber that I'm not familiar with, but he did a very good presentation on the Zodiac Killer mystery. He was in California, so he visited all of the crime scenes. Maybe not all of the information was perfect, but it was somewhat well presented, and I have to give credit to this Gavin guy for openly admitting that he had ADHD and he had trouble remembering some of the things and he was jumping all over the place. And, you know, just when someone's being honest like that, I do appreciate it. There's also a video about the story on the channel The Internet Investigator, and you're just going to be finding more and more pieces of information. T. Erica also has some info on Jay Foy's videos. And as I said, most of you have heard these videos. Most of you are somewhat familiar with the story. On the last two Zodiac Mondays, I've talked about Jay Foy, and I really did not have a whole lot to say, but I'm going to play a video clip anyway that will give us a small introduction, and then I will respond.
My grandpa is the motherfucking Zodiac Killer, and this is not clickbait, so please, I need the power of the internet to share this, bookmark it, and blow my comment section up. I want to start off by saying this is not just based off physical appearance. I typed in my grandpa's name on Google the other day, and to my fucking surprise, internet sleuths have been throwing my grandpa's name around for years, connecting him as the Zodiac motherfucking killer. As you can see here in all these pictures on the screen somewhere, that it looks exactly like my grandpa. Let's talk about it. My grandpa was a Vallejo police officer. Yes, the same area where the Zodiac Killer's fucking killings took place. Let's move forward. Let's talk about the Darlene Sharon murder. Let me tell you, this is not in any order, but the more evidence I give you, you are going to be convinced that my grandpa is in fact the Zodiac Killer. Darlene Farron and her boyfriend Mike or Matt, forgot the fucking guy's name, were driving around Vallejo one night, the night that my grandfather happened to be on duty, driving an unmarked police car and wearing plain clothes. Mike, who ended up surviving the shooting, said that they were being followed around by this car all night in Vallejo before they pulled into Blue Rock Springs. They said when they parked, the car pulled in, a man hopped out of the car, and Darlene, the girl who passed away, said, "Oh my God, that's Richard. He's gonna kill us both." Apparently, she was dating a police officer in Vallejo behind her husband's back. She was apparently a thotty. Rest in peace, Darlene Farron. So this guy in her passenger seat is one of her many boyfriends. And it was well known by her friend group that she was dating a Vallejo cop, although she never told them the name. She had a painting party at her house a few weeks before her murder, and it was said that my grandfather, Richard Hoffman, showed up uninvited, and she told her circle of friends that she is scared to death of him, and he was not invited there. My grandpa denies these claims. He says he never laid eyes on her, but then later goes on to say, "I know that she worked at a restaurant locally here in Vallejo." How the fuck have you never laid eyes on her, Grandpa? You tell me about that. Let's move forward. As Mike said, right before they got shot, she said, "That's Richard. He's going to kill us both." My grandpa's name is fucking Richard Hoffman. Now let's talk about something else that I thought was really weird. In a letter that the Zodiac wrote, and my grandpa's police reports, and also this poem that I'm going to talk about later, my grandpa spells the word until wrong. He spells it wrong. He puts 2 L's at the end. Where in multiple letters of the Zodiac wrote, he also spells until with 2 L's at the motherfucking end. Well, let's talk about the Sherry Bates murder that took place a couple years before the Darlene Ferrin murder. She was in a library doing her homework. She had just moved from Nebraska. Nebraska, why do I mention that? Because my grandpa lived in Nebraska. My mother, biological mother, was born in Nebraska. My grandpa was also in the Navy. Sherry Bates' brother was also in the Navy. This is weird, right? It's all coming together. Well, this murder took place. She was at the library studying one night. She leaves and gets shot up, where they found a poem handwritten underneath a motherfucking desk. And forensic analysis and handwriting analysis say that is the exact writings of the Zodiac. And they say that this is possibly the first killing that the Zodiac ever did. Well, this letter was initialed RH at the very bottom. RH, Richard Hoffman. Forensic analysis experts said that letter was written by the Zodiac. So why is no one connecting this to my motherfucking grandpa? Somebody tell me why. It is said that my grandpa and Darlene, the one who got shot in Blue Rock Springs, had a romantic sexual relationship behind everybody's back, behind my grandma's back. Let's talk about his character. My grandpa's character, he was known in my family to be abusive, controlling, manipulating, and also unfaithful to my grandmother. Now we're going to sit here and pretend that my grandpa didn't do this shit. They also say that the crime scene was tampered with. Why did Darlene's family get a call that she was shot before the cops even knew about it? And that call was placed by a payphone outside of Vallejo Police Department. Someone tell me that. And my grandpa was first on scene to that shooting. And later it was revealed that scene was tampered with. My grandpa showed up on scene within 5 minutes of the shooting being reported. He sent away the officers that responded with him. Who sends away responding officers on a possible double murder? And the crime scene was tampered with. It was later revealed. So you're still going to tell me my grandpa is not the Zodiac Killer. What are we going to do about it? I don't fucking know. My grandpa's on vacation in a grave somewhere. But I'm convinced my grandpa was a Zodiac Killer. Yesterday, I posted a video that's now at like 3 million views, talking about how my grandpa, Richard Hoffman, was a Zodiac Killer. There's a lot of questions in the comment section. I'm going to try to address those. I'm also going to show you guys a few clips from a documentary that includes my grandpa interviewing, acting weird. To my knowledge, it's acting weird for him.
During the ride to the hospital. And of course her shirt or sweater, whatever she was wearing, was off. And each time that ambulance attendant blew air into her chest, there was a little piece of material from her bra that I could see fluttered with every breath he blew into that girl. This piece of material would flutter.
And then a witness statement from the guy Mike, who was with Darlene Ferrin the night of the shooting in Blue Rock Springs.
A friend of hers, not to worry about it. He was just jealous. That's all she said about it. He was just jealous. She never mentioned his name, but she said something about Richard. His name was Richard. I kept his name Richard. And I think that was his name. She referred to him as Richard, the Zodiac Killer, the guy. Did you say he's really a mean temper and that if he ever found out he would...
So first, I'm not excited. I'm not happy. I'm not thrilled. I'm not proud. A lot of people in the comments are thinking that I'm proud. I am shocked. My jaw's on the floor, and I'm simply sharing information with you guys on the internet. That is it.
So what do we make of this? Officer Richard Hoffman as a Zodiac Killer suspect. Now, I have talked about some things on the channel before, and on a recent live stream that I did, I said that Jay Foy might be very loud, he might be very abrasive, he might be very confrontational. And there was this other YouTuber out there named Call Me Chris who said it's almost like he's trying to do a rap video, like a rap music video, but he's not. He's talking about true crime. And she wasn't quite sure why he chose to present his information in this way. And I wasn't either. I was very surprised that someone would get up there like they're about to do some type of music video shoot and then just talk about the Zodiac Killer. But what I followed up with was Jay Foy's information, and his theory that he's presenting really isn't too different than the styles and theories that people put forward, the method that he is using to analyze the information. Moreover, most of what he is saying is not originally from him. These aren't his original observations. And he is fully aware of that, and he openly admits that. He says that he spent 13 hours going down the rabbit hole one night, couldn't sleep, stayed up all night reading about the Zodiac Killer, and in the first video he openly says that internet sleuths have talked about Richard Hoffman as a Zodiac Killer suspect for years. So he's giving credit where credit is due, and he even cited some of the sources. And back in 2020, I did a 3-part series on Richard Hoffman as a Zodiac Killer suspect, and almost everything that Jay Foy has shared in his videos is found in my 3-part series, going through all the points, such as the misspelling the word until with 2 L's, and the other one he talks about messing with the E's and I's and the misspellings. That is the word casings. Richard Hoffman would misspell the word casings, Caseings, and what it appears is that, okay, Richard Hoffman was a bad speller, and the Zodiac was a bad speller. Give credit where credit is due. That's a strong point. Now, that's mostly what I try to do here on Zodiac Monday. Look at some type of theory that has been presented. Is this a strong point, or is this a weak point? And because I've talked about a lot of these things in the past, I really wanted to pay attention to Jay Foy's videos and interviews and look at how he was sharing the information. And is there something new that I haven't talked about in the past? And the answer is yes. Now, he claims that Richard Hoffman was the Zodiac Killer, and he approached Darlene Ferrin and Mike Michaud at Blue Rock Springs Park, July 4th, 1969. This is the second Zodiac Killer crime. And that Richard Hoffman pulled up behind him in his car, left for 5 minutes, then came back. And during this time, Mike Michaud and Darlene Ferrin are sitting in the passenger seat and driver's seat, respectively. And Mike Michaud said, "Hey, who's that? What's going on?" And Darlene Ferrin said, "That's Richard." She knew who he was. And at some point during the night, she said that the person who was following her was named Richard. So the car pulls up behind them, then leaves, and then pulls up 5 minutes later, if that was the same car. One of Jay Foy's points is that that's the way that a police officer would approach somebody. He didn't pull up to the side, or he didn't try to get in front of them. He pulled up directly behind them, walked out, and then walked toward the window and started firing the way that a police officer would pull up directly behind someone, like when you get pulled over on the side of the road for a traffic ticket. The police officer pulls directly behind you and then walks toward the window. This is a weak point. Number one, if that's the way that a police officer acts, the Zodiac Killer didn't do that at Lake Herman Road, almost certainly not. I think all of the physical evidence from the first Zodiac Killer shooting, the murders of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, on December 20th of 1968, would indicate that the Zodiac's car pulled up to the passenger side of David Faraday's car. So that's an immediate strike against that theory. And the next one is, if this is just the instincts and mannerisms and nature of a police officer, at Blue Rock Springs Park, the Zodiac walked toward the passenger side of the car and started firing. He blinded Mike Michaud with a flashlight and just started shooting bullets into the car. I think that would also be completely contrary to police procedure. The police officer normally walks up to the driver's side of the car and, trying to, ask people their questions, and then you say, "Hey, officer, is there a problem?" and all of that. That is approaching the driver's side, whereas the Zodiac approached the passenger side. So I have to say that that's a weak point, and there's been some dispute about whether or not Richard Hoffman had a car at all that night. Tom Voigt responded to one of the recent Zodiac Monday episodes, Tom Voigt of ZodiacKiller.com, by saying that the vehicle that Richard Hoffman should have had that night was a motorcycle. He would have been in plain clothes, and I think that that is not disputed by anyone, but that he would have been driving a motorcycle, not a car at all. Now, this was disputed by Andrew Gray, who appeared on the panel discussion show on the French Wrecking Crew, which I'll talk about in a second. And Andrew Gray said the police report simply states that it was a unit, that just Richard Hoffman is, referred to as a unit as opposed to a motorcycle. And this comes from some confusion that was shared in the 2007 Fincher film. And I'm really quite unsure of that. I think it comes down to the concept of, would you refer to a motorcycle as a unit? And I think that this entire setup, all of these points that have been arranged about how these are just the behaviors and actions of a police officer, are just completely inconsistent with actual behavior that you experience in your day-to-day life. And furthermore, it's inconsistent with the actions of the Zodiac Killer. As I said, comparing Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs, they're definitely not committed with the exact same footsteps. Now, here's another point. The Zodiac Killer is going to go on to write a letter after the Blue Rock Springs shootings, really 3 copies of one letter that are mailed to 3 newspapers. And in these letters, he is stating that I am the murderer of the 2 teenagers at Lake Herman last Christmas and the girl on the 4th of July. To prove that I am the killer, I will state some facts that only I and the police know. And that is something that, I mean, I am paraphrasing, but you guys are familiar with this letter. And one of the points brought forward by Jay Foy is that Richard Hoffman would frequently refer to, I mean, his own wife as just the girl. And girl, he didn't call her honey or sweetheart, he just said, hey, girl. And in the Zodiac's letter, he's referring to Darlene Ferrin as the girl. And, I mean, believe it or not, I do think that this is a strong point if it's a linguistic similarity that's in his verbiage, because Darlene Ferrin would have been in her early 20s at the time of her murder, and countless people have looked into this. Why is he calling her a girl, and clearly she's an adult female? And there are 2 real responses that we get. The first is that there is actually some type of intimate connection going on with Darlene Ferrin, which Jay Foy is proposing. And the second is, well, the Zodiac might have just been older than her, or even to the contrary, he might have just thought that he was more mature than her, superior in some way. Like when somebody the same age calls you boy or girl or a kid, that can definitely happen. But I'll give credit where credit is due. I do think that is a strong point. Now, a lot of the stories that are shared by Jay Foy in his videos are that Richard Hoffman was reported to have been very abusive in the family household. Jay Foy lived with him until he was about 9 years old. I take it back. He visited the house, and he was part of Richard Hoffman's life until he was 9 years old. He would spend Christmas there every year until he was 9. I take it back. Not living with them, I meant he was involved in Richard Hoffman's life until he was 9. Then his father got custody of him after age 9, and he went on to, discontinue all contact with Richard Hoffman. But there were lots of stories of abuse. There were lots of stories of just about how he was extremely unpleasant in the household, and I don't deny any of that. I don't doubt any of that. When people are coming forward and they're telling stories about their abusive grandfather, I'm not just going to say, hey, no, you're not telling the truth. I believe all of that. But is that relevant to the Zodiac Killer mystery? No. I mean, just that there are stories of abuse in the Hoffman household, I really just can't say that that is a strong point of any relevance. So, Jay Foy's interpretation of the evidence, which is based again on a lot of other sources that have been shared online, really do not strike me as anything that is amazingly compelling. And we've been through it all before, and yes, there's some cause for concern for Richard Hoffman to be the shooter at Blue Rock Springs, and I've talked about that in the past. But other than that, I don't really see an enormous amount of info that would connect him to the other Zodiac crime scenes. Now, another point that's been raised by countless individuals is that Richard Hoffman gets into the ambulance with Darlene Ferrin after the Blue Rock Springs shooting. The shooting occurred at perhaps 11:55 p.m. on July 4th of 1969, and then the Zodiac leaves, and then the call comes in at 12:10 a.m. from the people who found the bodies and reported it, and then Officer Richard Hoffman is the first one on scene. They take Darlene Ferrin to the hospital in the ambulance, and Richard Hoffman rides along with Darlene Ferrin, and he's making some comments about how he can see her bra, and he can see the paramedic blowing air into her, trying to revive her. Then Darlene Ferrin passes away at 12:38 a.m., and then the Zodiac makes his call at 12:40 a.m., and what was the exact distance? Is it 2.2 miles away? Some people think that Richard Hoffman was at the hospital at 12:38 a.m. There's no way that he could have gone to the payphone that the Zodiac used to make the call and drive 2.2 miles in 2 minutes. People in the comments section, even here on Black Box Online Radio, are stating, yes, absolutely, you can drive 2.2 miles in 2 minutes. I mean, it's just, like as soon as he heard the news, get in the car and go. And I mean, I've estimated that stuff too, like just from driving the back roads of West Virginia from point A to point B. Yeah, you can drive 2.2 miles in 2 minutes. I agree with that. It's all the other time that would have been accounted for. Like, was there some witness that stated that he disappeared for a while? Was there somebody who just reported that he wasn't present? I mean, everything that we understand now is that Richard Hoffman was at the hospital at the time. And while that works mathematically just sort of as the crow flies, I don't necessarily think that there's enough evidence to say that that's what happened, that Richard Hoffman left the hospital at 12:38, made the phone call at 12:40, gets in the car, drives back to the hospital, and nobody notices. That would be some very, very slick stuff. And it's not impossible, but it's improbable. But these are just some points that I haven't talked about before in regards to Richard Hoffman as a Zodiac Killer suspect. And in all seriousness, I'm quite surprised about the number of people that have tuned into this theory. People are always curious about the Zodiac Killer mystery, but just the amount of an explosion that Jay Foy has had, because this information has been out on the internet for years. I think part of it is because he is using TikTok, and he created a very large splash. Maybe it's some new ground for TikTok, and also it's the method that he's using to present it, where it's very short and to the point. And he's actually, putting the documents up on the screen when he states that, okay, I'm referencing, this police report, or I'm referencing this website, and you just see it all instantly. It's all encapsulated into these really small recordings. And his presentation style is something that we perhaps haven't seen from a Zodiac Killer theorist in a very long time. So, if anything, he got a lot of attention on his Zodiac suspect, which was what he wanted. So I will give credit to him that he accomplished one goal. But now we're going to be dealing with things such as DNA, fingerprints, palm prints. All of this stuff should be on file. All of this stuff should be on file because, as Jay Foy states, Richard Hoffman wasn't only just an officer, he was promoted to detective. And, he spent years with the force. All types of physical evidence should be on file for Richard Hoffman. Let's do the forensic examinations. That's what's important. You can talk about how somebody uses 2 L's in the word until the cows come home. Until the cows come home. Yeah, wow. I didn't even plan that. That worked out nicely. But in terms of just how and why this theory is coming together, insufficient evidence. And I've always said that about the Richard Hoffman theory. All right, you can place him at the crime scene at Blue Rock Springs Park, but what was he doing on December 20th of 1968? What was he doing on September 27th of 1969? What was he doing on October 11th of 1969? And how does he fit into the story in that way? Because those are just a bunch of giant question marks. But ultimately, that's my take on the subject. If you would like to respond to Jay Foy's videos and provide any additional comments about Richard Hoffman, I know I didn't go through everything because I've talked about Richard Hoffman on the last 2 Zodiac Mondays. So I just wanted to share some info. Also, though, if you want to hear more about him, there is a video that just came out on Ken Maines' channel, Unsolved No More. Lots of Zodiac Killer content and discussions, and if anything, Jay Foy has brought the Zodiac Killer back to the mainstream circles, and not only the mainstream, but also, as you see, various parts of the underground, so that much is appreciated. And as you can see, every Monday I do a segment about the Zodiac Killer, Zodiac Monday, right here on Black Box Online Radio. And if you want to follow along with all of these discussions, you can hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And you can also go through some of the links in the description box. One of them is for buymeacoffee.com. Buymeacoffee.com/blackboxnid88 allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And our first one comes to us from Batman66. Batman66, thank you so much for your regular and consistent support. Batman bought you a coffee. I never get tired of saying that. And also, Batman66 has been helping out a lot with the YouTube shorts that come out Monday through Friday. I also release them on Facebook. My Facebook name is Ned DeHaan. On Instagram, BlackBoxNid88, and on TikTok, BlackBoxNid88. So lots of things that you can find, lots of content here on Black Box Online Radio. If you want to follow along, I invite you to follow me on those platforms, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. And our next one comes to us from River Prawn Pottery. River Prawn Pottery, thank you also for your regular and consistent support. Much appreciated. And we have CZ Guy. CZ Guy also has become a regular supporter of Black Box Online Radio. You guys are all absolutely amazing, and I really just thank you for your help in tuning in every week for episodes about the Zodiac Killer, Jack the Ripper, and D.B. Cooper. And on Tuesdays and Thursdays for the summer, I am going live for True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. True Crime Talk Radio is a segment that I created where I discuss multiple subjects within a single episode, and those episodes come out live here on YouTube at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you would like to download the audio version of this program, you can do that on Spotify and Apple Podcasts under the name of Black Box Podcast or Black Box True Crime. And lastly, I would like to give a shout out to Not Ray Johnson, who is running the Black Box Online Radio fan page over on Instagram. Lots of great images and artwork over there. Not Ray Johnson on Instagram. Now, I told you guys that I would be discussing a new proposed solution to the Z32 Cipher. Lately on Black Box Online Radio, I've been recommending a channel called Paulscape72. Paul has made lots of videos about the Zodiac Killer. He did a 5-part series on the Zodiac Killer design influences, because Paul is a landscape architect from Australia, and he began to notice that the Zodiac Killer was almost drawing out his images and diagrams, and maybe even the ciphers, in the way that a landscape architect would draw them. And I was a little bit skeptical at first, but I've had Paul as a guest on the channel, and he makes some very convincing cases that the Zodiac Killer may have had familiarity with architecture, landscape architecture, or technical drawing. Most people think the Zodiac had some type of engineering background, but Paul almost disputes that and really wants to zone in on technical drawing, draftsmanship, and landscape architecture. And I said he had made a new video on the Z32 Cipher. The Zodiac Killer has 4 confirmed ciphers that have been attributed to him: the Z408, the Z340, and those 2 have been solved, the Z13, this one has not been solved, and the Z32. And Paul's solution to the Z32 cipher is 4 radians and 4.5 inches, because what the Zodiac Killer did was he mailed in a symbol that was on one of his letters. It's almost the bus bomb crosshairs, we can call it that shows different X's and markers. And the Zodiac said that he was going to detonate a bomb, and the way you were supposed to find the bomb concerns radians and inches along the radians. And Paul is not the first person to talk about using radians in the solution. There was one that was proposed by Richard Grinnell of ZodiacCiphers.com, and I believe that Andrew Gray, also played a part in that. And that one was talking a solution that would read, estimate 4 radians and 5 inches. Now, as you see, Paul's is very simple, but one thing that I really do appreciate from Paul's video is that he's using the instructions that were put forward by the Zodiac Killer, giving credit to another person who has tried hard to solve the Z32 cipher, and his name is Sphere the Cube, who said that the Zodiac laid out instructions on how to find the location of his bomb, how to solve the Z32. The Zodiac laid out a lot of instructions on what to do in multiple aspects of the mystery. And Sphere was the one who said that, a lot of people don't seem to be following the instructions that have been put forward by the Zodiac Killer. And Paul is more or less done that, I think, because he's using the bus bomb crosshairs, he's using radians and inches along the radians, and a particular detail that was mailed in on the Zodiac Killer's Phillips 66 map, which says, set to magnetic north. I hope I will articulate this as well as Paul did. You have to go over and watch his full presentation on Paulscape72 about the Z32 cipher, and it's that you're going to draw the radians on the map, and one arm of the radian, the angle of 57.29 degrees, goes to the police station in San Francisco. Then when you set it to magnetic north, you set your compass to magnetic north as opposed to just directional north, you're going to adjust for 17 degrees. And when you adjust for 17 degrees, it is going to bring you to a place called Paradise Valley. Now, is Paradise Valley the location of the bomb? And we would have 4 radians and 4.5 inches to Paradise Valley. I mean, I think that this is very simple. And when you watch Paul's videos, not only is he bringing in his experience with draftsmanship and technical drawing and showing how the Zodiac might have actually understood these concepts and been borrowing things from famous technical drawing and draftsmanship textbooks, but this is very clear-headed, it's not confusing, and it's also just not something that is so far out where you have to make these types of stretches. But Paul put a lot of time and effort into this video on the Z32 cipher, so I wanted to give my full review and honest take on the subject. And I also began to notice that in his video, Paul talks about other solutions that would mathematically work out. You could also say 5 radians and 1.25 inch. You could also say 5 radians and 2.25 inch. I mean, there are just going to be multiple solutions that would work out mathematically. One of them would take you to Martinez, California. Another one would take you to Pleasant Hill, Contra Costa. And if there are multiple solutions that work with this method mathematically, then how can we say with definitive certainty that the one that Paul has settled on, 4 radians and 4.5 inches going to Paradise Valley, was the actual location that the bomb was set to be detonated at? And Paul's explanation for this in the video is, it has to do with the terrain. The other ones are going toward very rural areas, very swampy areas that would be very inconceivable to place a bomb and detonate it there. I can accept that as well. He's the landscape architect. And someone, though, just like me, always has to have a little bit of skepticism and a little bit of a cause for concern. But to this day, I have not seen an ounce of evidence that the Zodiac ever actually planted a bomb or created a bomb. He drew out diagrams for a bomb, but any evidence of this physical bomb being placed at any of these locations, and that leads me to believe that maybe this was some type of empty threat. But also, Paul and I are in absolute agreement on one thing. Let's say hypothetically this solution would work out. Well, why not just have the Radians go to the police station? Why not just do it backwards and be like, alright, you adjust it for 17 degrees in the opposite direction, and the target is the police station. Why not? Because the Zodiac Killer said that he would not do that, following the instructions. Prior to the Z32, we have the Z13 Cipher, and the Z13 Cipher has 13 symbols in it, and beneath it it says something to the effect of, I hope you don't think it was me who wiped out a blue meanie with a bomb at the police station, even though there's more glory in shooting a cop than shooting a kid because a cop can shoot back. It just wouldn't do to move in on someone else's territory. Paraphrasing, right? But that's what the Zodiac said. And my interpretation of that is that the Zodiac was openly stating that he would not bomb a police station, unless he's going to do some type of twisted roundabout and say, haha, just kidding, or something like that. The Zodiac was known for dark humor. But I don't think so, because he is giving us instructions to follow. I mean, if everything is just a lie, then what would be the point of inserting clues like set to magnetic north? What would be the point of inserting clues like concerns radians and inches along the radians? I think when it came to the location of the bomb, there is a real solution to the Z32 Cipher, as well as the Z13. For a long time, I had considered that all of the cipher solutions outside of the 408 were just duds and fakes, and they had no real value. And even if you go back and listen to my 3-part series on Richard Hoffman as a Zodiac Killer suspect, I'm like, is there just a chance that the 340 is a giant dud? I'm going to try and solve it myself, but let's see. Yeah, I'm saying that stuff in 2020 before the 340 was actually solved. Next point. After they solved the 340, David Jarl and Sam, that is, I really began to think, the Z13 most likely has a solution. The Z32 most likely has a solution. And Paul talks about the Z13 in his video on the Z32, and he's a strong believer that the solution is Alfred E. Newman, or more in a more complex version, Alfred E. Newman, me why worry. And there's some evidence for this. Firstly, the Zodiac Killer talked very frequently about comic books and maybe even things like coloring books and magazines. Alfred E. Newman was the mascot for Mad Magazine, and it begins with AEN, and it also ends with MAN. AEN meaning the initials for Alfred E. Newman. Because this Z13 cipher was created as a response to a challenge. What was the guy's name? Dr. D.C.B. Marsh of the American Cryptological Association. Don't quote me on those specifics, but the cipher expert who issued the challenge to the Zodiac Killer, saying, put your name in the cipher no matter how complex it is and we'll crack it. So then he would do it in his own dark and twisted humor by responding and saying, okay, Alfred E. Newman, here's just something else that I ripped off from a magazine. And I've talked a lot about the Alfred E. Newman connections in the past, and maybe I'll do a longer presentation, but I guess I'll just sum it up for you now real fast. I was really trying to find out, is there some type of deeper connection to Alfred E. Newman? And Alfred E. Newman, the mascot for Mad Magazine, was more or less just chosen because they liked the way it looked. They had 20 different possible choices for Mad Magazine and who's going to be the face of it. They're like, I like this one the most. So there's not a lot of depth to over researching into the story of Alfred E. Newman. It might just have been something silly that the Zodiac inserted as a way to troll the cipher organization. But to this day, the Z13 cipher has also not been solved. What do you think about Paul Brookbanks and his solution to the Z32 Cipher, and he is not the one who came up with the Alfred E. Newman solution, and he admits that that's not his original discovery. But what do you think about that one as well? And I really want you guys to watch the video on the Z32 Cipher over at Paulscape72. I invite you to like and subscribe over there. I think that this stuff is so much more valuable and fascinating than these ranting Jay Foy videos, but that's just my take on the subject. And I also invite you to subscribe to the French Wrecking Crew that is run by Jerome. And Jerome has launched a new set of panel discussion shows on the French Wrecking Crew, and I am a participant in those. And the recent ones we did were with Ross Geraci of Planet X Filmworks, as well as with Druzer, also known as Andrew Gray. And there will be a special guest on the next one, multi-hour, multi-person discussion shows over on the French Wrecking Crew. And if you want to follow along with some different types of Zodiac Killer discussions, I invite you to check out New Cokes 2024, NUKEHOAX 2024, run by Vincent McConnell. And Vincent McConnell has been making a lot of Zodiac Killer videos. I particularly like the one that he did on the Zodiac Killer, Golden State Killer connection involving Joseph D'Angelo, and he also publicly called out Thomas Henry Horan, author of The Myth of the Zodiac Killer, and did some responses to his live streams. And yes, Professor Horn has been releasing more Zodiac content on his channel, which is just under the name Professor Thomas Henry Horn now, but you'll see the stones unturned in the title cards. And they're a little bit hard to watch because he puts the Zodiac Killer in the title, but he doesn't talk about the Zodiac Killer for the entirety of the episode. Sometimes there are only a few sentences that are thrown in, and he is saying that he's going to release more Zodiac Killer content, but he's going to be putting it behind a paywall on his premium site. And I just don't think I'll be exploring that based on the amount of free resources that we have here on YouTube, and also just things that I think might have a little bit more credibility, because Thomas Horn has also stated that he's going to do a direct response to a theory that involves the father of a YouTuber named Manny Grossman, and he wants to just do some expose on how Manny's dad was a criminal, and I hope he doesn't do that. I think that that is completely unnecessary, because I think we all know it's mostly going to be a bunch of unsubstantiated claims, and just to call out the family member of another YouTuber for almost no reason, just to kind of rustle their feathers and poke fun at them, I think is a poor taste decision, but that's just me. And right now, though, I would like to switch gears, and I'm going to be welcoming Scott Bobbitt to the show. And Scott has a different set of observations that he has made about the Zodiac Killer mystery. He does have a suspect, but I think that Scott's observations relate more to the Zodiac Killer's greeting cards, as well as just also things like the maps, the radians, and Scott looks at the case in a different way. And without further ado, I'm going to be welcoming Scott Allen Bobbitt to Black Box Online Radio's Zodiac Monday. I'll play the interview clip, and this will be a portion of it. Shout out to everyone who left super chats on the live streams. I go live on Tuesdays and Thursdays here on Black Box Online Radio for True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. I did one recently about John Benet Ramsey, but mostly on True Crime Talk Radio, you can talk about any subject. And without further ado, I would like to welcome Scott Bobbitt to the program. Scott, are you with me?
Yes, Ned, how are you doing?
I am doing just fine. Firstly, thank you for being a guest on Black Box Online Radio. And I would like to ask you, how did you first get curious about the Zodiac Killer mystery?
That's a really great question. I'm originally from Southern California, and I had briefly heard things about the Zodiac Killer here and there. I watched the movie Zodiac back when it first came out, and to be honest with you, I fell asleep in it, and I didn't really remember anything about it. But in 2018, I went to a family reunion in California, and I was living in Atlanta at the time, and a person that I know there, who I'm actually related to, she's a distant cousin of mine, she told me she wanted to meet with me. And so my nephew and I met with her at a Starbucks, and we just had small talk for a little bit, and she just came out and said, I need to tell you something, that my dad is the Zodiac Killer. And I had no idea what to think or what to do. I was completely blindsided by the whole thing. And so when I got back home to Atlanta from that trip, I started digging in and I was pulled in. In a nutshell, that's what happened.
And to be clear, you're on the show not to talk about this person's Zodiac Killer suspect, because that's more or less something that got you curious. Because, as I understand, you have made a lot of observations about the Zodiac Killer mystery, and it goes in a completely different direction, right?
Completely, yeah. I'd come to the conclusion very early on that her father was not the Zodiac Killer. Um, and it just started me on the path to start picking up breadcrumbs and digging in. And once I got into the story and it unraveled before me with shocking, just shocking circumstances and coincidences and circumstances, that I just kept going and going and going, and I unraveled things that I'm here to share with the public and with you. You know, a lot of the things I've already shared with you, Ned. Um, and we got to be kind of careful how this all gets unfolded, because there's so much information that I do have. I don't want to overload everybody, but just, get out there bits and pieces and let everybody chew on it and see what we can do with it. Um, that's pretty much what my goal was.
And what was your first step during the research process? Did you look at suspects? Did you look at the Zodiac Killer's letters? Did you look at a map of California? Did you look at the ciphers? What was the first part of your research journey?
My first, well, what's ironic was when I first started my research, the hunt for Zodiac was just coming on the air. It was like a 5-part History Channel thing came on, and the real thing that, and then of course I watched the movie, the Robert Downey Jr. and Jake Gyllenhaal movie of Zodiac, and then the one thing that really opened up a lot of stuff for me was the documentary that is on. I saw it on YouTube. It was like an hour and 45-minute documentary. Probably watched it 100 times. Called "This Is the Zodiac Speaking." So I dug into everything. I went on in podcast. I researched Wikipedia. I was in anything I could get my hands on. Um, that's where I just started downloading as much information as I could.
And it sounds like you would use the expression you went down the rabbit hole. Out of curiosity, how did you find Black Box Online Radio?
Um, well, there I was, the other thing that I'm really interested in is in the DB Cooper case. And so I was just Googling or checking on YouTube one day for Zodiac Killer and DB Cooper, and yours came up as a hit that interact with both of those cases. And that was specifically what I was looking for.
Okay, yes, and as Scott said, in addition to Zodiac Monday, I also do a segment every Friday about DB Cooper, Cooper Friday. And if you want to follow along with all of these true crime discussions, you can hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. Okay, though, Scott, so you're going down the rabbit hole. You're watching all of these Zodiac documentaries and listening to podcasts and watching videos and reading articles. But what are some of the observations that you have made about the Zodiac case that you believe are original?
Well, when you say original, I think what you're referring to is the cards. Most people spend their time trying to, break ciphers and figure those out. Most of those have been, uncovered since I started this. I mean, I think History Channel uncovered one of them pretty good. I think at least half of it, and then the other one was solved 2 or 3 years ago. Um, I didn't. I got into the ciphers and I tried different things. I took the Halloween card and I took and I printed it out, and I took an X-Acto knife and I cut the little eyes all out, and then I tried overlaying that as a mask key over the top of the ciphers. And I was just I was like, this could end up taking up my entire life. So what I ended up doing was studying the psychology of the Zodiac and really getting into his head. And so in doing that, I started focusing on his cards, his artwork, because from my research, I could tell that he had purchased some of the cards and then altered them to fit what he was trying to say. And all of the answers that I found, the pattern and the key that I found to unlock who he was and what he was doing, were in the cards, the drawings, and the pictures that he drew.
Now, Scott, you and I have had a chance to talk about this offline. So would you say a fair assessment of your observations would be that the Zodiac Killer left very, very intricate messages in the greeting cards? And I hope people will approach this with an open mind, but you're believing that the Zodiac left clues to his identity in the artwork in the greeting cards, and it goes a little bit beyond some of the general observations that other people have made that, oh, well, maybe the pumpkin on the Halloween card means this. You have made a lot of in-depth theories and hypotheses about the artwork. Is that fair?
Absolutely. I believe with law enforcement, and before I even tell you this or say this online, was when I first put all this together, I did take it to the FBI. I don't think they took me serious, but then again, they might have, and they wanted to just cover it up. I don't know. I kind of got the impression both ways, so I don't know. But to answer your question is absolutely in the artwork, and we'll go over all that. There is information in there that can absolutely tie him to specific physical things that were registered in medical documents. Now, do I have access to those? No, I don't. But if we could get the right people who do have access to certain documents in government to connect those dots, they could definitely link it to the person who I consider is my person of interest. And it's a name that's not out there right now. The only one that really has this person as a suspect. So, and I know that's hard for a lot of people to swallow when they hear a new name, because everybody's got their favorite, person. But my person is somebody that nobody's ever heard of before.
All right, so your research journey ultimately brought you down to finding your own suspect. However, is there a particular greeting card that you would like to talk about first? Perhaps the Halloween card, or maybe one of the other ones? Where would you like to begin?
Well, I want to start with the Mount Diablo map first, because that is part of his artwork. Even though it's a printed map, he did draw on it to explain certain things. That's where my whole unlocking the key to his little kingdom there was in the Mount Diablo map. Because what it did, and I'm going to mention other people's names here from their research and work and books. I don't know what all the legalities of that, but I do want to give credit where credit's due, because these people gave me the pieces of the puzzle that I used to put together my own image. It started with, I never read Mike Cole's book, but I did find online his hypotheses about the airports being linked to the Mount Diablo map on the radian lines. He did something there, and he started drawing a line off of Mount Diablo, and he said, there's a pattern here. These lines, these radian lines, are heading to all of these different airports. So that is where I started with that. And I would literally lay in bed and stare at that Halloween card and be like, what the heck? What is this about? What is this all about? What is he trying to say here? There's more going on. So I I tried to get some 3D glasses when I first started looking at the Halloween card, and the red and blue lenses, and I couldn't find any. So I went to like Office Depot or Staples or one of those places and bought these transparent keychains. And one was red and one was blue, and I had one on each eye. And I bought black lights, I bought red lights and blue lights. I did everything just to see if there was anything hidden in there, because I was studying in the ciphers. There's this thing called steganography, I think it's called, where you can hide certain images, and if you have a red lens, it will start to appear. Well, I didn't really find anything like that, but when I was looking in the background of the Halloween card, I saw like a question mark and a 6, and they're pretty clear, and I didn't know what they meant. And so David Gold, I'm not completely a hugest fan of David's work, but I do respect his enthusiasm. And he planted a little seed in my head, so he does get some credit for this. He talked about, um, he's like, oh, Zodiac and DB Cooper's the same person, and he the airplane is in the eye of the skeleton on the front of the card. Well, I looked and I'm like, well, I see something there. Maybe it does look like a little bit of an airplane, but he put that in my head, so I don't know if I'm suffering from conformatory biases. I'm seeing something that I want to see. I don't know. So that seed was planted in my head.
Well, yes.
Once I
Oh,
Go
please
ahead. I'm
continue.
sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, excuse me, I thought you were finished, that David Gold, of course, it runs a YouTube channel, and he has a book out there called My Dance with the Zodiac Killer, and his suspect is named Frank Lee Morris, among others. He has 3 suspects, actually, and what I find is so much more valuable to discuss is not only who was the killer, whose suspect does this person have, but also the observations that people can make about something, because even if you don't think that Frank Lee Morris was the Zodiac Killer, I certainly don't. This thing you said about you looked at the Halloween card and you thought that one of his observations about the Halloween card could be accurate. Well,
Right.
okay, then fair enough. And I think that those things are more beneficial in a lot of ways because you're looking at different parts of the case. And when people just look only at the suspects, it's almost like a tunnel vision way of exploring this mystery. Now,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
but I've heard a lot of things from you just right then and there. And you said that the Zodiac Killer has a connection to airports and airplanes. And would you like to share more about that?
Yeah, I would. That was the key that unlocked everything. One night, I was probably 3 or 4 months into this rabbit hole. I was focusing on the 14 on the skeleton's hand, and also the 4-teen on the inside of the Halloween card. And I grew up around airplanes a lot. So I know I never officially got my pilot's license, but I used to fly small aircraft. And it was just too expensive for me. I was a carpenter and such, and I just couldn't afford it. But one day I had I had turned the card upside down, and I looked at the 4-teen upside down, and I noticed that it was an N33, and then it was something I couldn't make out. I wasn't sure if it was an upside down T or an L, and then the 4, I said, okay, that looks like an H digitally. If you look at like a digital clock, the digital numbers on a microwave, the letters now appeared to be N33LH. Well, the first thing I did is I ran on the internet N33TH, and it came up with an airplane from like 1995 or something, like a twin-engine aircraft. I knew that was too new of an aircraft. And I put in N33LH. Now, I hate putting this information out there, and this is one of the reasons I've held off on going public with this information so long, because I don't know the legal ramifications of telling